Hello, everybody. Hey, welcome to today's webinar with Succurri. We're going to have a really important conversation around the importance of IT security training for your employees. I've got Grant and Andrew Eckstrom here with me. They are the owners of Succurri.
How's it going, Tony?
Welcome,
Hello,
gentlemen.
thank you for having us.
Yeah, another great conversation with you guys. I always learn a ton. Let's talk a little bit about today's conversation. We're going to go through some of the top security risks for businesses out there, and most importantly, maybe one of the biggest mistakes that leads to like 80% of the hacks. And we'll go through some of that. And then talk a little bit about how companies can create a culture of security and why it's so important and what does that even mean. And walk everybody through the process of the IT security training that you guys provide for employees or that they should be getting. And there's some really cool stuff we'll share with you there. And then, of course, we have our giveaway that we'll announce. People out there may or may not know, but Succurri does a lot of great IT management work in a bunch of different areas. And so these webinars are our way to share some of that information, some of that education around this. And today's topic is centered on IT security, but there's all kinds of things that you guys get into, which is great. And of course, we do have a YouTube channel. If you're not able to attend these webinars, we do record them and put them out on your YouTube channel. So you probably have people watching this, the recorded version of this. But if you're attending today, you probably want to subscribe to that because we put these webinars out. We also do other kind of like fireside chats and other types of things that are really important around IT. All the things that Grant and Andrew are knowledgeable on, and we put that out on YouTube and our channel out there. So growing list of subscribers that we have out there. So I just, little ad for our YouTube channel there.
Hit that button.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hit that button.
And I would say, like, just to plug that, like, this is, these videos are oftentimes cutting edge material that haven't made it to books yet. They're very rarely spoken of because they're people on the forefront, on the front lines, like Grant and I, who are seeing these things happen. So our webinars, like, oftentimes are the first time you might hear a concept that's emerging. So like I said, definitely check them out. They're very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into this. So, top three sources of IT security breaches, and I want you to talk a little bit about each. But the one thing that shocked me was all of these actually relate to employees or back to employees, and that's why we're like, hey, look at this. This is where all this stuff is happening, or where all these breaches are happening or originating from. We should probably start talking to people about this and how important it is, and how training can help in these areas. So Grant, you're the certified cybersecurity expert on the call. Tell us about, when you look at this picture, what comes to mind?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start back with I'm guilty for why these statistics exist, right? Because in my network engineering career, I was always like, I can put controls in place to stop these kind of breaches, and it's kind of true, right? Like there are some things that as a network engineer, security professional, we like shiny toys. We like to put all these cool things in place. AI is, another one that's starting to come into play. But through that process, I finally figured out that I can do all the cool things, all the bells and whistles, and I'm still going to have security problems because the employees have never been trained, right? And so the concept ultimately works itself out as if the employee still has to log into something, they're still going to be able to put in credentials. They're going to put their email address in. They probably have a multi-factor. And if they willingly give that up to a bad actor without understanding what's happening, all the controls that I put into place kind of, they don't provide a lot of value, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't put controls in place. That's not what I'm saying at all. You have to have those in there to start with. But if the final defense of your security system is the employee and they have no idea how to defend themselves, you completely negated the fact of all this hard work that you put in. It's kind of pointless, right? So the people that are behind there, ultimately the tools that you're putting in place are to protect employees. And if the one person that doesn't know how to use it is the employee, it's kind of like giving somebody a gun without giving them any training on how to use it, right? It's dangerous. So that's why these statistics exist, right? That's why it's mostly coming from phishing, right? So an employee gets, and I will say employees, but it's staff, it's management, it's ownership, right? Sometimes owners are worse than employees, and so like an employee will get an email that is well crafted, potentially targeted towards that employee, that it has something related to something urgent, like your account has been breached or your account password is changed or a new device has been added. Click on this link to verify. Well, you click on the link and it prompts you to put in a username and password, and then you have to put your multi-factor in, and you're like, oh, I got to go look at this. What you just did there actually started the breach, right? That's where the connection for the bad actor has now been established. So we call those man in the middle attacks. The man in the middle attack has been around for a long time. We're talking about one specific version of it, where yeah. So they used, so phishing's the tool, right, to get you to do something, and then once the phishing attack has been successful, you have now unwittingly given up your information. And the scary part about that is that now that you've given up that information once, and this kind of goes into that next slide, it goes into what's called a token theft. And what's really scary about it is that they don't have to come back and authenticate again. You've done that for them once, and they've been given basically this pass to be able to come and go as they please without your knowledge. You're not getting prompted for MFA again. And it only took one time to do it. And so the scary part about it is, like, you may have gone to a website that looks completely legitimate. You put your information in there, and it might even log you into the site. And that's where the man in the middle attack could happen. But they've grabbed that information, they've grabbed your token, and now at that point, basically they have access to, and we'll use the email account. I like to pick on Microsoft. That's what we'll use 365 as the example. So now they have access to all of your emails. They have access to anything that has access inside the 365 platform. So it could be documents, it could be pictures. In some cases, and actually a lot of cases, Microsoft is tied, authentication is tied into other platforms. So anything that token will allow you to have access to, they now have access to. And they can be in there for months, years potentially, without even you having knowledge that they're there. So really scary stuff from the phishing side of it. Kind of if you go back to so that was the phishing portion of it. Stolen credentials, that's the easy pickings. We'll call that the low hanging fruit. So out on the dark web, you can easily go out there, and there is billions of stolen passwords out there that you can easily buy for, fractions of a cent, and you could just buy them in bulk. And at that point, it's really interesting because you have human psychology that plays into this. You have human beings that will use the same password over and over again, or use a slight variation to it. Like, for example, the most common password to use right now, which is scary, is like winter 2025 ! Or $. I kid you not. Like, you can't write this stuff. So, but
that
it's just common in the security world. It's common knowledge. It's because if you talk to me back in fall, it would have been autumn 2025 ! Or $.
Because people are required to change their password for certain things every so often, and so the way to remember it is they don't have tools to remember it for them. The way that they do it is they just use the time of year and the date.
Yeah, so that's one of them. Or your dog, and the year and the ! Or the $. Like, all these things are really common, and so the bad actors know that this psychology exists. So if you come across a stolen credential out on the dark web, now you start seeing patterns. Like, okay, I know this password was good. And if you see that type of pattern of, like, here's a name and a number, chances are I could probably figure out what your password is based on what time of the year it is now. So if that credential was lost last month, chances are I just add the new date to it and the ! Or the $, and I'm in. Now, obviously, there's some additional factors that go to that, which come into the training side of things. But human beings always use very similar patterns because they don't have tools, password management tools, to be able to help them with randomly generated character passwords that are longer than you could ever think of. And so it replicates itself over and over and over again, and it's widely known in the bad actor space of it's low hanging fruit.
So what are insider threats? When I read that, I was like, oh, somebody on the inside of the company is like maliciously, like the insider job,
Yeah, believe it or not, so the insider threat terminology is used in both cases. One, you have a bad actor on the inside that's potentially trying to steal data, but more commonly is an employee that just happens to mess up, unwittingly become an unwitting accomplice to the scheme. The one I always like to use as an example is that you have, let's say, like an example, like a bank, right? The bank is fortified. It is designed to be able to be secure from at the moment you walk through the front door, right? But then you go around the back door and it's propped open because the smokers are outside smoking and they got a little wedge in the door and you just walk through the back door. It happens, right? And so, and no slam on smokers, right? But I mean, like it's that's kind of a well-known thing as well, is that you don't have to go through the front door, you come through the back because it's the easiest way in. And so insider threats are unwittingly and unwillingly allowing these things to happen. Like an employee propped that door open, right?
Yeah.
Not thinking, not that they wanted to let somebody in, but they wanted to be able to get back in themselves. And so that happens in other scenarios too. IT provider, IT guys make their own back doors so they can easily access systems from home, right? Well, now that's access is now available to a hacker as well, potentially. So that's where most of the time insider threats are going to be really employees that are unwittingly being involved in an event.
So it all relates back to people. These things all relate back to employees, could be owners, could be, staff, could be part-timers, anybody that has access, but it's all relating back to people. We'll talk a little bit about what, you mentioned the word controls as an IT management company, the controls you put in place, but the weakest link is the human being, essentially.
Right. And keep in mind, like, I mean, the percentages up here are extremely high, right? And the reason why is that over time, IT, like the IT providers, security professionals have filled in all the other low-hanging fruit, right? So, I mean, obviously there's patch system vulnerabilities that exist, right? That's another easy way to get in. But all these things that over the years that have happened, the security professional is always a step or two behind the bad actor, right? Of like, oh, okay, this started happening. Now I have to be able to go fix this, right? It's a constant trying to keep up with what the bad actor is doing. And the one thing that has yet to be fixed in all these things that we've, all the new systems we've been putting into play is actually fixing the person that logs in.
So we talk about these controls. Let's talk about what those controls are and a little bit, two-factor authentication. Everybody, I think, knows what that is now because it's all over the place. You never used to be that way, but now, you've got to authenticate it through one of these devices, like, oh, you're trying to log in. Is this you? Click yes, it lets you in. You mentioned having tools around managing passwords for you. You could talk a little bit about that. The third one here, Managed Security Operations Center. When you said that, I was like, whoa, what's that? That sounds like NORAD. So I want to have you talk a little bit about that. But then this last part, security training, that's the thing that is the nebulous thing, or the thing that that is something that maybe isn't done as often as we'd like. But maybe talk about these controls for a second.
Yeah, my little disclaimer out to the people out in the security community. By no means am I saying this is all the conrols that are necessary to secure a network, right?
Someone's watching, they're going to,
they're like, oh my God,
talk about.
Yeah. These are the ones that are a little bit more end user facing. A lot of the security things that we do behind the scenes, end user never sees it, right? So keep that in mind as we have this conversation. So two-factor authentication, obviously, it's on just about every account nowadays. And if it's not, you really need to question who you're working with if it's not being enforced yet. And the reason why, and going back to what I was saying, is that I'm not saying that all this time and effort in these controls are wasted, right? If you don't have two-factor authentication in place right now, you can get picked like a booger, right? It is just that simple. Hey, we'll call it what it is, right? It's grotesque.
Right.
But it's that simple, right? If somebody if you only require a password to get into a system, that is like close up shop, go home, right? Because game's over. So two-factor authentication, it should be mandatory. It's not across everything yet, but it should be. Good password hygiene, on the other hand, is something that we're still working with a lot. And so we talked about that just a little bit ago about human psychology and how password combinations are being used over and over again and with a slight variation, and they're guessable patterns, right? Or somebody's using password 123, or I've got stronger security on my luggage, right? So think about making or using like your address, combinations of your address or things that are found on social media, right? These are all really easy tactics to pick up on. So good password hygiene comes down to realistically using a password management system and allowing that system to generate passwords for you. Like I have thousands of passwords. I don't know what they are. Honestly, it's liberating, right? I don't have to remember what my password is. I don't have to remember what number I used last month and add a 2 to it, or add the next number to it. All my passwords are unique. They're 20 to 40 characters long. Longer is better. Like I said, I don't have to. That's something that's out of my mind space now. It's a book that is not taking up room on my bookshelf, right? And so having that password management in place is life changing. Andrew, you can speak to that one as well. I know that you've kind of had the same aha moment as I have with that.
I'll tell some of my stories in a second on that.
Yeah. So Managed Security Operations Center. So SOC, or Security Operations Center. This is kind of more of the we'll call it the reactive state. People are going to get in, right? No matter how much we train, how many controls we put in, something's going to happen. How do you know when it's going to happen is the important part. So having somebody watching the systems and looking for things that are abnormal to what's normal day-to-day function. So, for example, let's say I'm working in our office here in Everett, right? And all of a sudden I see there's a login coming from Texas. I clearly am not in Texas. Why am I logging in from there? So that should draw a flag and say, okay, that's not correct. Or for some reason, I'm logging in from Everett, we'll say, but all of a sudden I'm not putting in my multi-factor token, but I keep on trying to log in over and over again. That should probably draw some concern as well, meaning that that's a multi-factor fatigue technique, which means that somebody may have my username and password, but they don't have my multi-factor, so they keep on trying over and over again, trying to get me to approve it. Right. And so that's kind of a control and also a training thing. So having somebody watching over the weird stuff, does it pass the sniff test meter scenarios?
This is like the banks are doing a lot better job of this now. Like if you go to I know this has happened, but I'll just say Chase Bank, you go, or Bank of America or Wells Fargo, you go to a new place that you've never been before and you start spending money there. Sometimes they'll shut you off. They'll shut your account off because they don't recognize it's not part of your pattern.
Exactly.
That's
exactly it. And so think of that but like accessing your email accounts or accessing systems, right? Somebody should be watching it. And it doesn't have to be, it's not like a single person sitting at a screen looking at lines of logs. Like it should be something a little bit more massive that's going 24 hours, 365. And when something is weird, you get a phone call and saying, hey, was this you? Or let me know. So that one's a little bit more of an advanced one. Or I think over the next couple of years, we'll see more people have something like that in place. But keep in mind, there is going to be a breach at some point, right? In your organization. And I'm speaking to you owners out there. It's not the question of if, it's a question of when. And so being able to mitigate the amount of damage that is done comes down to how long that breach is going on, right? In most cases, you're looking at, I think I have to look at the recent statistic, but it was like 256 days on average before detection. That means that somebody's been in your network for a good part of a year, moving around, doing whatever they want. And so the likelihood that, that your damage is minimal is, I would say, slim to none, versus if you know within minutes that something has gone wrong and you're able to stop it and go back and reset passwords and get everything cleaned back up, your damage is really, really small. Right. So different compensating controls of where you need to be depending on what time you think when you think something's going to happen. But that's why that's there.
So security training is part of a control, even though it's not like a physical control on a computer somewhere.
It is absolutely. Yeah, it is definitely a control because it's the backstop, right? The employee is the last line of your defense, and you're also only as secure as your least secure employee. So if you have an employee that clicks on stuff all the time, like they get an email and they click on it, it only takes one employee to do it, right? So, and that's the scary part about security is that from a security provider's perspective, I have to be correct 100% of the time to prevent a breach, versus on the bad actor side of things, they only have to be correct one time and it happens on a breach, right? So the percentages are completely skewed.
So it's kind of like you almost should move security training to the top. But two-factor authentication, I mean, if you're not doing that, it's like you said, you get picked like a booger.
Yeah. Yes,
I mean, I think the reason why we wanted to have this conversation is the stats tell us that a lot of these breaches are based on or lead back to some sort of employee lack of information or lack of knowledge.
Almost 90% of these things are happening because of a training related issue. I mean, we can go back and look at some of like the major breaches, even like some of the ones that happened in Vegas. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, all related to employee training.
So this culture, creating a culture of security, it definitely starts at the top with leadership, like every other thing related to culture. If leaders aren't doing it, why should the employees care, kind of thing. But I left these two up here, the visibility and actionable information to make a point, because a lot of, and Andrew, you were talking about this. It was kind of like a lot of people say, oh, be secure. You need your business to be secure. You need a cybersecurity expert. But the things that I guess companies that have a culture of security around IT, it boils down to having information that they can use to take action with to make their business more secure. Maybe talk about some pieces, that lead to why training is so important, and what are some of the conversations you have around security in your quarterly and annual conversations with clients?
Would love to. So we talked, like I said earlier, that some of this content is really like cutting edge and, it's evolving. So Grant and I are network engineers by training. We've done this for 25-ish years. Like when I started in the business, if your hacks came directly from the internet, right? You had to have a firewall in those days, and then it was viruses, right? And so like you don't even hear about those things as security breaches anymore in our industry, because we figured it out a long time ago. And so what happens, like as we're seeing things change, is that like new openings or new threats evolve. And what we're seeing now is like we have customers who use our security services, which are amazing, right? And have all these various tools and controls. And I'll focus in on like just the password management side, the password hygiene side. What we assumed was that because we have these great tools and the customer is paying for them and they've authorized us to set up their staff with that give people good tools and they'd make good choices. That was wrong. So what we found was we needed to have much more visibility into the actual use of these tools. So training is part of it, but like visibility is another part. So what we found was that the owners or the business decision makers would choose security, which was a good choice, and we would implement the tool. And no one was checking that it was actually being used because we just assumed. So now we actually go about and we check on it. So I'll go through this, like I'll tell a story that I think really is important to highlight this. So we have a great customer. They have our like highest level security tool set, and they are very committed to it. And so we just started doing like audits on the fly, just because we're like, oh, this, let's just make sure, and really not like checking what their employees' usage was of their password management system. And what we found is like 95% of the employees hadn't checked into the password management system in months, and some of them had actually never used it. And so we're like, oh, well, if you're not using it, if you're not logging in, you're not using it, you're not getting the benefit. Well, what was also important to see with that is when we had onboarded that security or that password management tool, we had taken copies of everyone's existing passwords from Google Chrome and the different places they had. So I had a little bit of information to work with. I could tell that when we onboarded that password manager, their staff had a lot of breached passwords on the dark web. They had a lot of like duplicated passwords that could easily be used to make a hack really bad. And so like it became very clear to us that we needed to be like advocates and help customers in this process. And that's where that kind of that broad, like you need to be secure and you need to have a cybersecurity expert. Well, they were secure and they had cybersecurity experts. They had us, and their employees were just plain old not using the systems. And so what this customer then did is we were able to give them through a dashboard. Now, if you can flip to that dashboard, I think it's just kind of helpful to see. I think it's one more slide over, or two slides. Oh yeah, this slide. So, this is the one more slide, I think. This one's the training one.
Yeah, actually, I took that out of there.
You deep six my slide.
Yeah,
you deep six my slide. So we'll go back into security. Yeah, we'll go back to security. But if you go back to the cultural security slide, this one, yeah. So ultimately what was happening was I could tell the customer by this dashboard exactly which employees were making bad choices. Not because they were doing it today, but because I could see historically what had been pulled into the system. I could craft the story of your employee could go to the dark web, or I could go to the dark web, get your employee's password, log into their email, and I'm like basically hacking your system today. And what was really important of what came of that is it wasn't just a vague, hey, be secure. It was John Doe has 13 breach passwords on the dark web. And of those, there are only one unique, so 12 are reused. And you guys, John Doe does your books and he has access to your bank accounts. You're at a really big risk of having a very significant financial breach here. So we're able to empower the employer or the business decision maker with really micro actionable items, right? They know John Doe has breached passwords. They know John Doe has his job has a lot of access to stuff, so he's a risk. So they were now armed with information to go to John Doe, have him make changes. And then the next time we meet, we can have this accountability culture where I can show them what John Doe's progress looks like. And if he's not making progress, they know that they need to make some business decisions about him. So ultimately what we're finding is the culture of security is buy-in from ownership, right? You have to buy the security tools. The owner needs to be aware of what those tools can and cannot do. You have to have training to make sure your staff are using them. You have to go back and double check that those tools are actually being used, at an audit level. And then what you see in there informs the actions that the business decision maker takes. And so it's like this cycle that you just keep repeating over and over again until everything's good. I'll tell you, this customer went from almost no one logging in to 3 months later when we checked their dashboard, everyone had logged in within a few days. And we saw actually progress, that there were fewer breached passwords on the dark web. There were fewer passwords that were being reused. And they were moving and are still moving into a securer, a more secure security posture. And it's not like this vague thing that they're hoping. We can measure it and track the progress, and they know where their risk is. So every time we meet, we go back and we have new action items. So that's what the culture of security looks like for us.
Well, that's the password part of security. And what I was hoping, so that obviously really, really important, great story. The thing that The thing that I took from that is, and we'll get into this, but it's kind of like different areas of security. Password management is one of those. There's other areas, and when we go through this process, I'll have Grant take us through this process of IT training. You get reds and yellows and greens and visibility on that in each of the different areas. And now, by the way, down to the person and the role. So if John Doe is in charge of all the money and he's not very secure with the way he manages passwords, like there's some things that we need to work on with John Doe to be more secure. And that's what you guys are able to tell. And that to me was like, oh, wow. Okay. Now we're talking, it's not just some, hey, let's slap on, antivirus. That's just basics. So when we go into how we train, how you guys train, I'm going to have Grant walk through a process. So we'll go back to that dashboard view and have him talk about that. But Grant, can you walk us through how you guys train your clients?
Yeah, and just to kind of step back a little bit with what Andrew was talking about, the training side of it, the process is the same, right? The culture buy-in is the same regardless of the tool. And so password management, having, being able to go back and report and make decisions based on actionable items.
Whoop.
No, I think Grant turned invisible there, or like froze on us. I can take up until he pops back in. So basically, when we have a structured, Succurri, our customers that are in our security packages, we have part of the package is a training library. And with that training library, we do several things, right? We have all this training information that they get scheduled to actually to listen to and take a test on, right? So we can measure their actual interest and engagement and their comprehension. And there we go. Grant's back.
Sorry, dropped off there for a second.
You didn't get hacked or anything, did
you? Zoom, I tell you. No, we love Zoom. Anyways, but yeah, so the I'm not sure where I got dropped off, but the whole point is that you have to have that top-down culture where ownership is standing behind it and driving it. And also being involved in it too, right? It's not like, oh, everybody else has to do it and I don't have to. No, yeah. Everybody has to be involved. And so anyways, I could drive on the culture all day long, but the process, the training, I look at training a little bit differently than I've seen a lot of different tools out there where, historically it's always been somebody's going to send you a phishing test email. And then if you click on a link, then you get publicly shamed and you have to go through all these classes and things like that. I don't think that's necessarily the right idea. How we approach it is that as new employees come in, or as the new employees go through the whole training process, one, it gives you a baseline of what their knowledge is, but also now you have a good understanding of where they might need some work, or if they're doing great and they've gone through this time and time again. Then at that point it's making sure that the knowledge continues to come down. So new information is coming out all the time for different types of tactics and threats. And so making sure that you have a micro training, once a month or once a week, where you're kind of keeping that information up to date, so nothing's getting stale. But it's not because you fail the test, right? Everybody goes through the training and spend some time. And so one, it's not like you're being shamed for it. Everyone in the whole company goes through the process, right? So then that way, then you can start having a little bit of banter back and forth, like my scores are higher than yours kind of thing. But everybody still has to at least go through that process. I'm not saying that you don't do the testing, right? You have to do the testing to see where, to kind of poke holes in the armor. But ideally having everybody go through the training process, that way it's not singling out different people for failing tests, because you never know when somebody's going to click on something.
So when we say tests, Andrew started to, while you were gone there for a second, he started to dig into a little bit of the detail of what's done in testing with clients. This is an example of an email that's fake. It's a phishing email, and it's trying to get you to give it information. So like we were talking about earlier, trying to get tokens so it can get access to email or other information. So you're saying periodically you guys send this to people, or maybe not this specific one, but versions of this that you guys generate and send to leadership, to accounting, to all the different places to see if you can get them to bite?
Yeah, but keep in mind, this happens after the initial training, right? So this is kind of more of an ongoing to see if anybody needs some additional training in specific criteria or areas. So like I said, you got to make sure that they stay separate. One is testing, one is training. So they are two different things. In this case, what we're looking at here is testing the knowledge of the person that's already gone through the training. And so that way you're not bombing somebody constantly with emails, making everybody absolutely paranoid, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but
healthy paranoia.
That's my healthy paranoia. That's right. But yeah, so we send these things out, and ultimately what that does is it gives us feedback on where there might be some gaps in knowledge. And so
the knowledge part of it, the training part of it ahead of these tests, are those videos? Are those you guys talking to them in a webinar or a conversation like this? Tell me about the knowledge part of it before these tests go out.
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways to go about it. The way, like, ours are going to be videos followed up with a small quiz. So that way people don't just, take the scroll bar and go all the way to the end and say, oh, I completed the video. Because people do it, right? Yeah. And so there's a small little quiz that basically verifies that the person actually understood the content. So yeah, and then from that perspective, once that happens, those test results come back and go to a dashboard, and then that's where you can start making some actionable items. You'd be surprised how many people in organizations feel that they are above the training, and people that are actually in critical areas. So I did remove the names out of here to protect the innocent, but like you have at the very top
and
here,
yeah,
like, so the person at the top risk here. So this is an actual dashboard of humans, of employees. And the funny part about it is that this person that has the low score actually deals with finances. That person right there, and you can see there's a phishing fail rate. They actually fail the phishing attacks 13% of the time.
Oh, wow. So 13% of the time they're clicking on something they shouldn't be clicking on.
Correct. And they have not completed any of their training. So this is a person that has a mentality that I don't need to do this because I am, insert reason here. But this report actually shows myself as an owner or as a IT provider that this person is actually one of the most risky people in your company, right? Because one, they're telling me that they don't need to do it because they know everything, which they don't, because they're failing 13% of the time. So having and also their information is actually involved in a breach already. So they become a fairly risky employee at that point.
Oh, interesting. What's the ESS? Is that some sort of score?
Yeah, employee security score. So think of it as kind of like a credit score. So, up to 800, credit score is a little bit more than that, but out of 800, and so 300 is basically you can't buy a house, right? But
you can't buy a car.
You can, but I don't know. You might not even be able to open up a bank account. But in this case, like I said, so this person's really risky, and with that, their job function is directly tied to financials, and so that makes them even more risky for a company-ending event.
Right. So let me ask you. Yeah. So you have acknowledge policy, and you have this person down here. No, their micro training score is really high, so they pay attention. They're taking the test, but they external breach too. So why do you think this ended up low and this one's medium and high?
So good question. So accepting company policies are going to be written policies that the company says this is how we maintain ourselves, or this is how we conduct ourselves. So it could be like a bring your own device policy of, or acceptable use policy of how do you use company supply devices. And so these employees that have no on there have not accepted a company policy. Oh. That one, from the legalese side of things, I would say that's problematic. From a, is the user likely to click on something? That's less of an issue. But so acknowledgement of policy should happen at the initial point of employment, right? Because they're given that whole employee packet. Hey, here's our the employee packet, our vacation times, things like that. Oh, and here are our acceptable use policies. Here are bring our own device policies, kind kind of thing. And so this is just a digital way to be able to track that they've accepted that. So realistically, they should all say yes. Employees should have that. But yeah.
Even though this person is on low, you may want to have a talk about them clicking on stuff that they're getting. 26 phishing fail. Is that
Yeah, I mean,
accurate?
So I mean, if you look at their ESS score, the score is obviously much lower than, it's in the 600 range. Their average training, they're missing some questions. In their micro training, they're missing quite a few questions, and they're failing their test quite a bit. So yeah, they've definitely done a lot more training than, the number one person at the top there.
Right.
But they are definitely risky.
Interesting. Well, and I assume once you have this conversation with leadership, if leadership is at the top, they're high risk, that's a different conversation.
It's a tougher conversation, right? I'm like, it's hard to go to a client and say, hey, just to let you know that you are the biggest risk of your company.
Yeah.
A lot of times owners don't like to hear that. And they're like, well, I'm just so busy, and I'm like, hey, I get it. But if you're the number one reason why your company fails, do you understand that you put out, X amount of people out on the street because your company got shut down, right? So as a company owner, you're responsible for, all these people's welfare. They come to you every single day to support their families. And so when you start thinking about it from that perspective of like, hey, your responsibility is really big. Some people start to change their mind and going, okay, I get it. I should be more responsible for it. But also I take the approach of like, if you're not going to do it, your employees aren't going to take it seriously either. And so that's why it's important to point that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so let's start
and I will tell you, Tony, before we move on, just really quickly, I'll tell you, I've had that conversation with an actual owner recently. We walked through their dashboard, and when we did the profiling, the owner was the most risky person in the company, and they were like mystified, like they had no idea. I mean, they knew they were busy and they knew that they were prioritizing other things, but they didn't realize until I actually walked them through like how I would breach their account based upon the information I saw. I was like, oh, I'll go to the dark web. I'll get your password. I'll figure out your variation. I'm going to log into your email account. I'm going to trick you with a phishing email to download weaponized AI. I'm going to install it on your computer. I'm going to then take everything you have, all your patient records, and I'm going to upload those to the internet. And then I'm going to crypto lock all your computers and hold you for ransom. And I went through the dashboard and I showed him each one of these points. And he was like, this is terrifying. He's like, this could really happen to me. And I said, it will. It's just a matter of time. And I said, if I send you a letter from a non-extradition treaty country, I was the one who breached you, and I'm holding you for ransom. So, it's just a matter of but he basically said, okay, I've got to prioritize this. And he said, I'm gonna take tomorrow off, and I'm gonna fix these because I know. And the thing about this was, once again, it was giving actionable items, micro actionable items that someone knew how to fix. Like he knew how to log in and change the passwords. And this was a password scenario on every one of the accounts that were breached. He knew how to do it. There was no education requirement. He just had an allocated time versus before, if you just said, be secure, that's a very vague statement. So once again, these dashboards, like if you're a decision maker listening to this call, if you don't have dashboards like this scoring all of the people in your organization, you don't have a good perception of your risk. Even if you're paying for the tools, you have to have dashboards like this that you can interpret, or have people like Grant and I interpret it for you. Because once we can translate your risk into actionable items, you can get rid of the risk. That's really easy to do. Yeah. So, that's it. But he transformed. This guy used the information we gave him, and he transformed his security posture.
That's amazing. Yeah, this makes more sense to me rather than all the phishing and token and blah, blah, blah. It's like, show me the dirt, let's get this thing cleaned up.
Show me the dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're coming up on a close, so I need to get through a few things and want to make sure we're doing key takeaways on today. And maybe Grant, you can take this one. Maybe there's more than one thing to remember, but
yeah, I mean, coming from the security professional, that is basically, I'm part of the issue of why basically 89% or 81% or whatever it is now, breaches are happening, is because we forgot about the employee. And you can't. The employee is the weakest part of your security system. But employees, the best part about it is that they absorb knowledge, and you can change that, right? So one of the easiest things you can do is give the employee the information and put them through the training, but also check, right? You have to go through and verify. And that's a security principle as well, as you have to go through and verify. Some other things are making sure that your culture it allows for these types of things to take place. Like you kind of talk about the ownership. If you have an owner that is at the top of the security risk and says, I don't have time for this, guess what? None of your employees have time for it either, and they're not going to take it seriously. So if it's coming from the top down and saying, yes, we need to make sure that this is really important, we're going to take time out, that is going to be one of the key drivers for making this happen. And keep in mind, like I said, test and verify.
Yeah. So let's see. Do we have any questions out there? I'm looking. I have one. I have one from Red, and he's asking, is this a tool you have to install on everybody's computer to find out about how people are testing? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So in our scenario, no. It's just a system that is a web page. It's both a education center and a testing center all in one. So no, it doesn't need to be installed on people's computers. You just have to log in, and so you'll get notified when new content's available to go take the training. When you're a new employee, you get a welcome email that says, "Hey, welcome aboard. We take things, security seriously here at Succurri. Insert your name here. Please make sure to take your training." And at that point, you'd be able to go through and approve your policy documents and things like that. So yeah, no installs to be able to track all that. Just think of it like if you have continuing education, you have some place where you go do your education and testing.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Any other questions?
So Tony, I see a question from a gentleman named Jim, and the question is, how do we get started, right? And so I can address that one really quickly. So it depends on how much time you want to put into this, right? So is this a solution that you're hoping you can write a check for, or is it a solution you want to really educate yourself on? If you're looking to be really educated on it, Grant, like you may have some security resources where you'd suggest people go, but I would say like most business decision makers are short on time as it is, and IT is probably not their core business, so they need to have like a write a check scenario. So my suggestion on like how to get started would be to contact your IT provider or the IT professional in your organization and ask them what security training tools they have available. Right, most managed services companies, IT services companies like Succurri, they have that in their tool stack. And then when you're evaluating those tools, ask them what their reporting capabilities are. So like we showed a dashboard that Grant and I can read and tell you exactly what the risk is for your organization down to the person and down to like how we would hack you. Double check with your IT provider or your managed services company or your IT professional. Do they have a similar dashboard? And if they do, you're on the right track. And then the goal is get those so that all your staff are using it. That might be like a policy or a procedure. Dedicate time for the training, have that accountability where someone is actually looking through these things, and then have that like modification or remediation period where people are actually being required to do what's being required, like the training or the password management. It takes a little bit of time, but ultimately I would say start it now, because it's a lot easier to start it now than to recover after a breach later. And it's a lot less expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Really good questions. Any more questions? Seeing we're almost up time. I do want to announce everybody on this who's attended this webinar, nobody who's watching, gets a free security training for an entire year. And this is up to 20 people. So that is something that we're willing to do because we think this is so important. And Grant, maybe you can explain a little bit about what that is. And then before you do, the QR code, you can scan that to go get more information on IT security training. That'll take you to Succurri's website. where they go into detail on what's included in IT security training. But maybe talk a little bit about the training you're offering, Grant.
Yeah. Actually, if you've gone through some of my security training, you'd be curious about scanning a QR code, but that's a conversation for a different day. Yeah. So how it works is what I'll do is I'll reach out to you. I know we've got some people on this call that are some decent sized companies, and so unfortunately you don't qualify. But I'll reach out to you anyways, and we'll have a conversation. And so the training is for up to 20 people. It is free for a year. It is basically we're giving the platform away. It is a stripped down version of the whole platform, but there is some really powerful tools in there that will allow you to go through an annualized training for your employees, be able to start getting your foot in the door and be able to see how your employees score. And so we'll have a little bit of a deeper conversation about time that you're willing to put forth towards it, because keep in mind, this is the start of the platform. And there is some time that's required from your staff to be able to go through the training. But if we get past those hurdles, it'll be really exciting for everyone.
So Grant, I'll put you on the spot. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Grant. If you're on the call and you're part of a pretty large company, Grant, would you be willing to train a department or a team that's under 20 people in that company?
I think that's reasonable. Yeah.
Andrew, were you going to add something?
Well, I was going to say that this platform that we're offering for a year for 20 people for free is literally the same one that we saw the dashboard for. So by the end of it, like as soon as you have your staff in there and they start taking their trainings, we're going to be able to read the dashboard just like we did for these other customers we gave examples for. So it's not some obscure different thing. It's exactly the same thing you just saw in this presentation. So what the goal will be is giving you those micro actionable items so you can go work with individual staff members and like proactively reduce the risk your organization has to a cybersecurity event.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Really important stuff, guys. So I want to say thank you. We're coming up on time here. Again, subscribe to our YouTube channel. This video will be out there in a few days or less. There's all kinds of great information. And then also sneak preview. One of the upcoming webinars is going to be on, okay, so you've been breached. Now what do we do? I think that's going to be important one. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, hit the subscribe button and like and all that good stuff.
Tell all your friends, repost.
Yep.
Tell your line managers.
Yep.
Anyway, thanks guys. I really appreciate it. This is good stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.